Welcome to MotoZone News, Episode 1. I did a test run for about an hour, about 20 minutes ago, and this is me ramping up again. This is live. I hope you guys are tuning in, sharing, share the broadcast. There's a lot of stuff happening in motorcycle news world. What I'm going to do is, because I did a trial run, I'm going to take an opportunity to just kind of bang through a few of the things that we're going to cover. One of which is, those of you familiar with MotoAmerica or AMA Racing have heard of Danny Eslick, two-time winner of the Daytona 200 for 2014 and 2015, winning the 2014 Daytona 200 on the Triumph Daytona 675R, and in 2015 winning the Daytona 200 on the Suzuki GSXR 600. If you've been following Danny's career closely and motorcycle news closely, you know that Danny got into an altercation with the police a couple of months ago, and he was sequestered or banned from participating in this year's MotoAmerica. Or excuse me, not this year's MotoAmerica, but this year's Daytona 200 race. So he was precluded from that, but the ban was lifted, I believe, last month, and he's been back on track. Since then, this is what now, May 5th, today, it is 12:47 a.m. in the morning currently. This news came out about maybe 48 to 72 hours ago. Danny Eslick will be standing, or if you will, sitting in for a Moto2 rider who was injured for one race. So he'll be sitting in for the Le Mans race. Now, this is really, really big because we don't, ever since Nicky Hayden went to World Superbike, he was like the last American. I think the last great American rider, in my opinion, was probably, well, I won't go into that. But anyway, the point is that it's great to see an America represented in Moto2, in the MotoGP series, one of three in the Moto2, Moto3, and then of course GP. So this is really, really big news for anybody who is an American road racing enthusiast. Those of you in the UK probably never even heard of Danny Eslick. Danny Eslick's claim to fame is not just having won, a handful of races and had a wonderful racing career. Danny's the type of rider who can adapt to a variety of different motorcycles. Basically, he can get on a bike and sort it out in short order, and he's pretty much good to go. Now, he has admitted that this opportunity was afforded him by somebody he knows, and he realizes that he's going to have his work cut out for him, because in the MotoGP series, it's just a completely different level of riding. And this is going to be a test of Danny's true grit. So I'm really happy for him. I actually got to meet Danny Eslick at Thunderbolt at New Jersey Motor Speedway back in 2014, where he raced. I was able to garner a couple of signatures from him, and always has a smile on his face. So I don't know much about the man, personally, but I understand. Somebody made the comment, and I can't remember who, but somebody in the spheres of influence in motorcycles likened him to kind of a sort of another Scott Russell type of rider, in terms of attitude, demeanor, and that sort of thing. And according to the narrative, Scott Russell was kind of a wild man back in his days. But I met Scott Russell, and he's a gentleman. He's a class act. Really great guy. He's also a motorcycle instructor now as well. So anyway, so Danny has kind of followed in his footsteps, and I would say in a good way. where he is just able to get on a bike. And this was kind of sort of Scott Russell too. I mean, Scott Russell raced for Kawasaki. He raced for Suzuki, Yamaha, and I think he even raced for Harley Davidson, if I'm not sure. I could stand to be corrected on that as well. In any or either case, again, this is really big news for American road racing enthusiasts. So Danny Eslick will be appearing at Le Mans in Moto 2. So we're going to stay tuned for that. We're going to watch that. The other big news in MotoGP is the Jorge Lorenzo. This is kind of stale news, but it's been around for about a week and a half now. Everybody knows that Jorge Lorenzo will be riding for Ducati next year. So his contract with Yamaha was up this year, and he is changing horses, not necessarily in midstream, but he's jumping from the Yamaha saddle into the Ducati saddle. And Ducati has stated that they will not be changing their bike for Jorge. So in any or either case, Ducati has put out a tremendous bike. They really seem to have sorted out a lot of, well, you know, the Desmo Sedici has, or the bike that it is now was not the bike it was when Casey Stoner was riding. So if you've been following development, obviously rules change as rules change. The designs and the engineering back of the research and development and the motorcycle itself changes as well. So Ducati seemed to have sorted out a lot of things, and they got a very fast bike as well. If I'm not mistaken, I think they were also the first to be putting the wings on their motorcycle, and I believe that Yamaha followed suit with that. So if you're looking at the races, you'll notice these winglets in the front of the bike there. So that's with that. Now, just in the last 12 hours, we got word that Danny Pedrosa may be switching from Honda to Yamaha. Now, this has not yet been, I'm not certain if this has been confirmed, but Motorcycle News, MCN, has reported that, I guess in so many words, that Danny Pedrosa may be making the move from Honda to Yamaha. So that's also big news. So that's essentially in a nutshell, what's the big news that's going on in GP. And then, of course, I mean, you want to get into all of the whys and wherefores and that sort of thing. I'm certain that will get sorted out as time moves along. Also in MotoGP news, KTM, all you KTM fans. Now, those of you who follow KTM and road racing know that KTM has a very strong presence in Moto 3. They will be making their debut in the full-blown MotoGP bike and a new motor. I believe it's the RC16, if I'm not mistaken. And they just recently had a test on the bike. I guess they weren't able to do too much with it because I believe they had some weather issues, which kind of made it difficult to really put the bike through its paces. In any or either case, the RC16 is KTM's full-blown MotoGP bike, and they will be appearing at next year's, if I'm not mistaken, at MotoGP. And Aprilia has also, they debuted, if I'm not mistaken, I think Aprilia sort of had a silent presence in GP for quite a few years because some of their motors have been used in the CRT, not necessarily the CRT or the satellite teams, and not the factory teams, but that's changing this year as well. Or that changed last year. So they have a factory presence now in MotoGP. So you have on the grid, and then of course you have Suzuki as well. Suzuki has been doing very well this year. Personally, I'd like to see Suzuki on the podium and maybe winning a couple of races this year as well. Maverick Vinales has been doing an incredible job. and Esparago as well. So if it, gosh, I mean, I'm really, really kind of shocked that this is Suzuki's second year back in a GP. So I think they took the first year, which is what teams generally do, to sort out issues with the bike, getting it dialed in, getting it set up. A lot of time, research, development, and feedback from the test riders, and so forth goes into getting a bike properly set up. Those of you who follow road racing may have heard of Marcel Ernie. Marcel Ernie is intimately familiar with all of these things, and he goes at great length to make plenty of videos about that as well, about setting up his bike, getting it dialed in, equipment used, and etc. and so forth. And that's a rider that actually turns his own wrench, and there are quite a few of them that do. Okay, so this is that kind of sort of wraps up all the MotoGP news, going from Danny Eslick to the top tier riders in MotoGP, switches being made and so forth, and then KTM having a presence next year on the grid. So it's kind of it's really exciting to me, because now instead of just having Yamaha, Honda, Ducati, you're going to have Yamaha, Ducati, KTM, Suzuki, and just an Aprilia, and all these bikes are going to be on the grid, and it'll be make, in my opinion, for more interesting racing. So that's something to look forward to. Now, moving on to let's see, other news. Those of you who have been following Eric Buell Racing, or EBR, knows that Eric Buell has had some ups and downs with respect to his company, and in terms of racing. So Eric Buell's is a story that it's kind of frustrating, because I mean, he's got an excellent product. And he's done a lot for road racing. He's had a very strong presence. He's really a low man on the totem pole in terms of, being a company, and a very, very small company at that. I mean, people thought Aprilia was a small company, or even MV Agusta now being a small company, but it still has a partnership with Mercedes-Benz, and Aprilia being owned by the Piaggio company. Piaggio is a company that also owns Vespa. Those of you familiar with Vespa scooters know that Piaggio is the parent company, and I believe they also develop things like things for aviation, helicopters, jets, and so forth. So I think they have something to do with jets, aerospace, or something of that nature on a small scale. But anyway, nonetheless, Aprilia is owned by Piaggio. So here you have some small companies, but that are relatively well funded, which is a really good thing. Eric Buell has not had the good fortune of having corporate backing, or a company with deep pockets, and this has been a part of the problem. You had a company, Harley Davidson, who he was with for quite some time, I think since the 80s. There was a very long relationship, but that soured in 2009 as Harley Davidson just felt that there wasn't a market for American sport bikes, and so Eric Buell was handed his hat, as they say, and he was left having to essentially take all of his wares, drawing schematics and so forth, and reinvent himself, essentially. And so the Buell brand morphed into what is now EBR. Now, EBR has not been without its drama as well. If you've been following Eric Buell's new company, there was a partnership 2 years ago that started with Hero Motorcycle Company, which is a rather large Asian conglomerate, or in motorcycle building or manufacturing, and that relationship soured last year, along with Larry Pegram and Larry Pegram Racing, and I think they had a Moto 2. I think he was a Moto 2 rider, Nicolo Canepa, uh, or he was a test rider, and I can't remember for who off the top of my head, but he actually set a track record on the EBR 1190 RS at Jennings Motor Speedway down in Florida. So anyway, my point back of all this is that Eric Buell has had a really rough go at trying to get his company off of the ground, and they went into a Chapter 11 bank, or a sort of a holding pattern, I guess, where all manufacturing had stopped. The workers were laid off, and the factory closed until they could secure assets, enough assets to restructure the company, which has taken place over the last several months. I think it's Liquid Asset Partners, which has basically taken Eric Buell under their wing, and they seem to have a good group of guys there that have some enthusiasm. You know, this is the type of business where I think to be in this type of business, you have to have a good head for business, but you also have to be very passionate and love what you're doing. Because the prospect of starting up a car company or a motorcycle company is, by every stretch of the imagination, a daunting task, and can end up being a black hole that you just throw money into and you get nothing in return for. You know, because this type of product is more geared around an enthusiast, you know, so to speak. So anyway, it's really exciting that Eric Buell was able to reopen his factory and put people back to work, and then to ramp up production again on his EBR 1190 sport bike. Now, this is a bike that has gained, as small as Eric Buell is, he's gained attention on the world stage, attention and respect. The bike has done well, probably not as well as it could if you know, the money and the research and development were more in place and there wasn't so much you know, of an unpredictable aspect surrounding the country with respect to the finances and so forth. And generally, you know, they say money makes the world go round, and unfortunately in the motorcycle world that tends to be more than true, because, you know, building a good motorcycle is an expensive proposition. Having said all that, the photograph you're seeing here with Motorcycle USA, this is, I believe, 2013, when Eric Buell and Splitleth, the Splitleth Racing team, which is a UK based team. That's Mark the Thriller Miller on the left, and the other gentleman on the right is Brandon Cretu, and they were, I think they raced together for 2013 and 2014, if I'm not mistaken. Mark Miller won the Isle of Man TT0 race in 2010 on an electric motorcycle, if I'm not mistaken. So he is intimately and has a lot of experience racing in the TT on this bike. And if you go to the Splitleth YouTube channel, there's just some incredible video of the EBR 1190 racing. And both 2013, 2014, and even I think last year. So there was this, I think this is the 2014 bike, if I'm not mistaken. This is the Dafabet bike. And then the last year, no, wait a minute, I'm sorry. Yeah, this was 13. The Dafabet bike was 13. The Fun 88 Casino race bike was 2014. And then the Zebra bike was last year. So EBR and Splitleth have been partnered for the better part of 3 years now. And that partnership has been rekindled and re-solidified this year. So EBR will again be working with Splitleth Racing out of the UK. It's exciting news. I think it's a really good blend. Now, those of you who are unfamiliar with Splitleth, uh, just a little bit of a backstory. Before EBR came into the picture, I believe they've probably worked with several other motorcycle manufacturers, but the one that stands out in my mind is Aprilia. Now, when the RSV4 had come out, I believe Aprilia, which is another small motor, by any stretch, it's hard to imagine that Aprilia is a small motorcycle company, but they are. If you juxtapose them against the likes of Yamaha, Honda, Suzuki, and a whole host of others, and then of course MV being another small company as well. But anyway, the point is that the interest, and this is another interesting aspect of all this. The reason why I'm going to kind of bring the Danny Eslick story into this, which is what I started off with. Because Danny Eslick actually raced on the EBR 1190 back in 2011, I think it was. I can't remember which race it was, but I think it was a race for second or third place. And he was going back and forth with a Suzuki GSXR 1000. And so the EBR was just kind of like shock. It really caused a lot of people to raise their eyebrow and say, like, what the hell is that bike? What kind of bike is that? And Danny Eslick handily spanked the Suzuki GSXR with this EBR bike. So that is, just one of quite a few examples as a testament to the fact that the bike has enormous potential. A bike that was quite literally built in a garage, competing on the world stage against, heavy hitters like Kawasaki, Suzuki, and so forth. Now, they did not do so well in World Superbike last year. And I had asked somebody in a thread, somebody who actually, I think, knows Eric Buell personally, but I was asking him, how come, EBR had such a weak, a horrible showing at World Superbike last year? And I guess, I can't I'm trying to connect the dots, but, off the top of my head, if I were to, and this is just pure speculation, if I were to guess, I would say it probably had something to do with the tumultuous, goings on between Hero and EBR and the Pegram Racing team and EBR and all of this sort of thing. My understanding is like some people didn't get paid, or and all of this, and so there is probably a lot of personality conflicts and that sort of thing, and that never works out well when you get into those kinds of headaches. Long story short, that relationship was dissolved, and it has left Eric Buell having to again start over at square one again. But there are a lot of people that believe it. I'm just wondering, Polaris, hello. It's like, it seems to me this would have been a golden opportunity, because apparently Polaris has deep pockets. Why couldn't Polaris take Eric Buell under his wing, keep everything in America, if you will, and let the development continue with that. But I don't know. Maybe Polaris doesn't have any interest in sport bikes either. It's kind of one of those questions. And anybody who's watching this or listening to this this live stream or this live cast may have some more intimate knowledge of it than I do. But I would really be interested to know why there's a great bike here, and the potential for a really great company. Why they wouldn't be interested. But maybe it's because now it's an election year. There's a lot of uncertainty in the economy. The stock market's been flopping around like a dead fish on the deck of a boat or whatever. But anyway, I mean, it just doesn't make sense to me. But sometimes none of these things do, and they're not meant to. But yeah, so it's exciting to see to know that Splitleth and EBR are back together again. EBR 1190R did win a race in the Pan Delta series, which is not a really well-known series, and it's probably a series where the level of riding or the skill of the riders is probably not on par with, say, a lot of the like FIM Dorna riders, like an SBK and World Super Sport and or British Superbike and that sort of thing. But I mean, a win is a win, right? So, and let's see, EBR. They also set the fastest lap time at that track there in China. The EBR set the fastest lap time in China. It's also set the fastest lap record, as I said before, at Jennings in Florida. So um, it's got cred. It has race cred, and in fact, Mark Miller was able to. They didn't. They really had to wash last year because they went through a couple of motors. And if you watch the split left videos, you kind of, Mark Miller and split left team kind of walk you through some of the problems that they experienced during last season, and the racing last season, and they kind of go through that. So I just found it fascinating. But it was also Mark Miller set the lap is the fastest American to do the Isle of Man TT on the EBR 1190. So that's another plus there. That's another feather in the cap, if you will. I think the EBR 1190 is a great looking bike. I think it's a fantastic looking bike. The lines are great. That you have this huge big portion of the frame, which actually the fuel sits in the frame. The design, the intent is to keep the center of gravity low, or to keep the weight down near the center of the bike here, as opposed to having it up here in the tank. And that's actually not a tank; it's just a cover, basically. And then there's kind of been this what's called a ZTL, or zero torsion load brake. You'll notice that the brake is not mounted to the hub. It's actually or the caliper, not the caliper, but the disc is not mounted to the hub of the wheel. It's mounted to the outer portion of the wheel. Okay, you'll notice that its circumference is a lot bigger than a traditional. In other words, you could probably fit a conventional brake rotor inside of the circle of the ZTL brake, right? But it's a single brake, so it's only on one side as opposed to being on both. Now, I read an article where Nicola Canepa, the rider for the EBR when he was with the Larry Pegram Racing, he said that both are good, but for different applications. He says if he had his choice, because on some tracks this brake works better, and on other tracks the conventional braking system works better. So he liked the option to be able to do both. And there are some photographs floating around out there where you see an EBR 1190 with a conventional brake system on the racetrack, but I believe that's him. And so there was that aspect of it. And if you watch some of the videos, they explain why the system works so well. I mean, obviously, if it didn't work well, you'd think these guys would have complained about it and say, it's a piece of crap. It doesn't work right. Throw conventional brakes on there. I'm certain that the team would have said, yeah, put the regular brakes back on the bike, blah, blah, blah. But they made it work. It keeps the front end of the lighter. It actually reduces weight on the bike and load under heavy braking situations and that sort of thing. So I don't know. There's other schools of thought out there, and I've actually got kind of into an argument with a motorcycle. Well, he actually builds motorcycles, and he's just no. It didn't, Honda tried it, and these other teams tried it, and it's pants and it's garbage, and no. But I don't know. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. And obviously, if it were as bad as some people think it were, you'd think the racers, which are the guys that are spending most of the time on the bike, would really complain about it. Obviously, if those of you who paid attention to the old Ducati Desmos Adichie in MotoGP, like when Rossi was riding and Stoner was riding, was it like 6 or 7 or 8 years ago? They complained about the Desmos Adichie. They said it was just, you couldn't ride it. And then, of course, Ducati basically must have had wax in they said, well, there's nothing wrong with our bike. It's impossible. We don't make bad bikes. It's impossible for us to make a bad product. But, me personally, I'm of the opinion it's kind of like 50% bike, 50% rider. It's kind of, you can have a great bike, and if you have an average rider, I mean, the bike is only as good as is not going to, the rider is not going to be able to exploit the potential of the bike. And if the bike is crap, obviously, it's not going to help the rider out much either. And so it's up to the team and the company to listen to the riders, and what the riders say about how the bike behaves and what it does and all this sort of thing. And this is what goes into, this is sort of the ritual or the dark art of tuning a motorcycle properly for the track, if you will. So anyway, I've been impressed with the bike. I've been impressed with the company. And, it's odd because someone brought to my, again, the same gentleman who I frequently speak with in threads, brought the Britain motorcycle to my attention. Now, I'd known about the Britain motorcycle for a number of years, but it just wasn't on my radar. And that motorcycle is not on a lot of people's radar because it was a one-off, essentially built by a gentleman in New Zealand, a Kiwi. And Kiwis and Australians are like, they're just don't get in the way of their motorcycles or their motorcycle builds or anything like that. It's like, it would be like interrupting an old man at a soup kitchen while he's eating his dinner. Not a good thing. I mean, they are just hardcore about their bikes. They just are totally immersed in it. And John Britton was no exception. He was a Renaissance man. He was an engineering genius. And his bike was way ahead of its time, the Britain V1000. It was a V-twin bike, and it romped the competition. I mean, it was just amazing. If you watch some videos, there's actually a very cool documentary out about how much time and man hours. I mean, he almost all didn't use any computer or CAD computer generated imagery or anything for developing the bike. It was mostly all done by eye and by intuition. I mean, almost I think every nut and every bolt. I think the only thing on the bike that wasn't designed by him was like the stator or just one or two of the electrical components on the bike, but everything else was his. The motor was all his. The chassis was all his. The wheels, everything, the exhaust. He was an innovator. He set basically he raised the bar so high. It was because of him that you had, carbon fiber exhaust and ceramic coated, exhaust pipes and or something to that effect, and a monocoque type of setup for the bike, which is something that Ducati later did as an iteration of in their Panigale bikes, and they basically came up with a sort of a chassis-less or a frameless bike, if you will. The engine being essentially the main member of the bike, connecting all the other components together. I mean, it's like the engine was essentially the frame, if you will. And I think what happened is one or two gentlemen had bought bikes from John Britton, and they reverse engineered the bikes. And so John Britton's technology had trickled down into a lot of today's bikes 10, 15, 20 years later. And John Britton's bike also had set world records as well. So, that's just a testament to being able to do something. So, in my opinion, there's no reason why EBR. Now, here's the other thing too, and I just want to talk a little bit about the Ducati Panigale and the displacements and this sort of thing. In World Superbike, the Panigale in the last few races has just been completely, in my opinion, just embarrassing Kawasaki. I hate to say it, and I don't like inline four bikes as a rule. But if I had to own another inline four bike, a Kawasaki would be my first choice. So, and Kawasaki had just come out with this new bike for Tom Sykes and Jonathan Ray this year. I mean, this was like the quintus. This was like, they're further pushing the envelope in the development of the ZX10 from the previous generation, and then just refining it and so forth. And anybody who knows anything about Kawasaki, I mean, they are just a literal powerhouse when it comes to engineering, research, and development. I mean, they have a whole aerospace division where they, develop like things for satellites and so forth. So they use a lot of those resources in the development of their motorcycles. And here, now Ducati is not a very small company now because they're owned by Audi, the Audi car manufacturing company, and that happened a few years back, like three and a half years or something like that ago. But anyway, so the Panigale, the 1199, which has been it's like 4 years old now, if I'm not mistaken. What is it, like 3, 4, 5 years old, something like that. The problem with V twins, I'll just preface what I'm going to say. The problem with V twins is they are excellent on short tracks or like moderately spaced tracks, but like where you have long stretches of like straightaways and that sort of thing, that's where V twins don't do so well, because V twins are not really cannot really generate that top speed. The power tends to fall off on the higher RPM. Now, apparently, Ducati has figured out a way around that. And if you've looked at Chaz Davies' most recent bike, let me see if I can find him here. Let's get Chaz. Let's see. I don't know if these are any of the recent. Oh, here it is. Yeah, here's one. Okay, let's look at this picture right here. If you're looking at this picture right here, you'll notice that the Chaz Davies Panigale has now, instead of the exhaust coming out down here between the wheel and the lower underbelly fairing, the exhaust is now running up over the wheel and under and midway between the tire and the seat back here. Now, some might say, well, no, what's the big deal about that? Well, anybody who knows anything about engine operation and back pressure at high or low speeds knows that the length of the exhaust determines how the motor makes power and where it makes power. And apparently they figured out the physics because I guess there's no rules as to what rules there are of exhaust. They're probably negligible. And because they are, Davies' team was able to figure out how to get more power out of the bike by changing the exhaust configuration. So this is probably, that's probably one of a few things that was done, but this is the most obvious, to me, the most obvious thing, or the most noticeable or visible change is in the exhaust system. So apparently, I guess having a longer exhaust allows the motor to have more peak power at a higher RPM. And this is what's allowing the bike to just run away from the Kawasaki's at the top end, and we're talking of a difference of 4 or 5 seconds is a lot of time. When you're talking about tenths of a second, it's not such a big deal. But when you're talking about 2, 3, and 4 and 5 second differences between the lead, bikes, and this is a V twin, and the Kawasaki's are inline fours, that's huge. That's a very, very big difference. And it also goes back into this other thing about there's no replacement for displacement. You've heard that saying. This is a 2-cylinder bike, but the rules in SBK currently allow for the extra 200 cc's or thereabouts displacement, and that essentially was to be able to make up for power in the upper range of the motor, because the physics, I guess, of the V twin, if it had if it were smaller displacement, it wouldn't be able to compete. But now I think with the way technology is, I think we're getting to a point where, because this is what doesn't make too much sense to me, and I used this iteration in the last thing, and I just want to bring up the Aprilia RS Cube here, which is the bike I was talking about a little bit earlier. So this bike here back in 2003 or 2000, this is a 3-cylinder MotoGP bike, because the rules allowed for it back then. It was apparently the first bike to be able to exceed 200 miles an hour on a track. I can't remember where it set that record, but this bike did set that record. But the bike was plagued with problems. But this bike was just shy of 1,000 cc's, and it was a triple. It was producing 240 horsepower, or around 240 horsepower at the rear wheel. And then they had a test mule that made 260 horsepower. So anybody who tells me that you need more displacement to equal the power, I say I call BS, because Aprilia, which is again a small company, was able to build a bike that produced as much, if not more, power than most of the bikes. But the bike, again, as I said, was plagued with it even caught on fire a couple times, at least once anyway, that I know of. And it was just not it was not controllable. And I'm not certain what the extent of the problems were, but I'm guessing there's been a sentiment expressed that the electronics of the time just were not up to par with dealing with, being able to make the bike controllable. So in a way, it was a bike ahead of its time. And it's a shame that the rules don't allow for 3 cylinders in MotoGP currently. And I don't believe, and I'm not sure if they do in SBK, but nobody's producing or building a bike that has that displacement for, that competition. But in World Super Sport, they allow for the triple to be, I think it's 675 is the cap. So there's a cap on that as well. But anyway, but those of you who've been following SBK know that Chaz Davies has been just dominating the track with this Ducati, and it's just a juggernaut. And if things continue on that track or on this trend, I'm going to go out on a limb and say Davies could probably, barring any unfortuitous circumstances, Davies will probably be able to secure the world championship in World Superbike. So, that, as they say, is that, but it remains to be seen. But so far, it's just amazing what they've been able to do with this bike, and to get that extra power out of the bike. And it could also be, Davies is, it's not, as I said, like before or earlier, it's like 50% rider, 50% bike. And maybe Davies has just upped his game in terms of being able to navigate better lines on the track as well. There's so many different factors that play into this. I mean, the track conditions, the weather conditions, the heat of the track temperature, the amount of the amount of moisture in the air. Even if there's no moisture per se, like on the track, there's still like moisture in the air, and moisture in the air can actually, depending on the dew point, it can sit on the asphalt, and sometimes it sits on the surface of the asphalt. So if there's a very, very high dew point, you might have some traces of moisture in and around the track of the track, even though the track may look dry, sort of thing. The tire choice, the compound that's used on the tires. There's just so many things that go into this racing stuff and developing and so forth. But anyway, I mean, I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but my point is that Ducati has been able to apparently make more power with this new exhaust configuration. That's my guess anyway, because it certainly, up until that point, it hadn't been doing so great. But now that they have this set up, I mean, it's just been, the star of the show. Anyway, that's all I have for now. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. I hope to be covering more motorcycle news, maybe even some motovlogging news, and stop using memes and start making sense. And earn the money as well, the dollars and cents. This is Zone Television. You've been watching MotoZone News, Episode 1. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great Thursday and an awesome weekend.